In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. I'm your host, Greg Stevens, and today we have a person I don't know that well, but I met in a brainstorming group and just thought he was so interesting. I was like, I really want to have you on the show. Folks, I'm going to let him introduce a little about what he does, but this is Sam Liebowitz. And Sam, tell our listeners what you actually do, how you came up among the ranks of podcasters and what you do for a living, and then kind of what inspires you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Greg. Really appreciate you having me on your show. Appreciate the opportunity to share my story with your audience. So I'm well, there's a number of things, but one of my main focus at the moment is I'm the executive producer of talkradio.nyc, which is an internet radio station. Now, most people know what a podcasting network is. And we're kind of like that, but we're a little different in that we do everything live first. So when we stream our shows, it's like, that's it. It's you get everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And our listeners seem to really like that because it adds a certain authenticity to the voice. But of course, we're recording it while it's live, and then we put out the recording afterwards, which becomes the podcast. But my hosts, they really like the fact that there is this opportunity by being live to have some kind of interaction with their audience, because we also stream to our YouTube channel. And so people can actually comment live on the YouTube channel, and then you can respond. Like when I do my own show, which is called the Conscious Consultant Hour, on Thursdays at noon, when I do my show, I know I always have a handful of loyal listeners tuning in live, and they're commenting. And, sometimes they're just saying, oh, great show, but sometimes they're asking questions or they're engaged in the topic. And so having that direct feedback really helps to build engagement and loyalty, and it has tremendous benefits. I love it.
That's great. And I love your voice because it just, to me, it's so soothing. I wish I had a voice like yours. It's just so nice. But let me ask you, how did you get into that? What path led you there? Because I saw you've been an entrepreneur since 1993. So kind of walk us through how you got to where you are now with the organization.
Well, it's kind of funny. I know in my bio it says I've been an entrepreneur since '93, but I've been thinking about it lately, and actually I've been an entrepreneur much longer than that. Because when I was a kid, I remember there was one summer, a friend of mine, his older brother used to deliver like dry cleaning and make tips and stuff. And so he was away for the summer. So my friend was doing it for him. And then he was like busy sometimes. So he'd say, hey, Sam, you want to make a little extra money? I'm like, yeah, sure. So I delivered dry cleaning and made some money. And then a few years later, a friend of mine, a different friend of mine, was like, hey, Sam, I got this great idea. You want to make some quick money on the weekends? I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, well, you know how they bring the Sunday newspapers around on Saturday nights? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, we'll go to one of those trucks when they're delivering it, and we'll buy a bundle of papers off the truck, and then we can go around and drop them off in all the bars in the neighborhood and sell them for like, twice as much. I'm like, because this is back then, like the Sunday paper was 25 cents. I mean, right. I'm really dating myself. So we'd sell them for 50 cents in the bars. And so, and I grew up in this very Irish, Italian, Jewish neighborhood in the Bronx. And you go up along Fordham Road and then back down Kingsbridge Road, and then you could hit like maybe 50 bars in an evening. And especially like during the wintertime when it was cold and snowy and rainy, like people didn't want to go out to buy the paper. And so we brought them there, and people would buy them from us. And sometimes the bartenders would even buy them, and they'd give us like huge tips. And it was really great because, I didn't get much of an allowance, and it gave me some extra money. I could buy some toys or things I wanted. I was in probably junior high school at the time. But I came home, and it was great for a while because it helped me to forget how I felt when I was home. And it's not that I had an awful home life, but it was just very cold. And I had an older brother and older sister. And my older brother's super smart, a real genius. My older sister was always like the goody two shoes of the family. I was the black sheep of the family. Like, I didn't do as well in school. And I just even remember as a little kid, even before that, we used to have this black baby grand piano in the dining room, which, my mom played piano and she had my brother get piano lessons. My sister had piano lessons. By the time I came around, she was too tired to like get me piano lessons. But what I would do is I would crawl underneath the piano, and there's this little cabinet next to it, which created a little nook. And I could crawl under there and I could hide for hours and nobody would even notice I was gone. And it's like all I wanted was someone to say, "Hey, where's Sam?"
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
eventually that would, but I could be there for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what happened over time is I really was one of those kids who always felt like his friends were his family, right? And I was always looking for community. But when you're so desperate, looking for your tribe, looking for your community, you sometimes choose the wrong community. You don't always make the best decisions. And over the years, I got involved with friends when I was in college who took tremendous advantage of me. When I finally struck out on my own and got into business, I had, partnerships that weren't so equitable, even to the point it got so bad. I made a huge mistake. I got involved with this real estate project with this broker, and I kind of knew I shouldn't trust him, but like, it was such a big project. I had a chance to make all this money. It would be a real chance to prove myself and be successful. And 2008 happened and he skipped town and I had no experience doing a development project and I didn't have any way to get a construction loan. I lost the whole thing. I literally lost a couple of $1,000,000. I mean, not just my money, but money I had raised and family money. I lost more money than I'd ever made in my life.
Wow. Wow.
And I was just, after that, I was like, oh no, this is not, there is something wrong here. I am not doing this again. There is no way I am ever going to allow myself to be in this situation again. And I was lost. I didn't know what to do next.
Yeah.
And then it's real New York story. I was at a party in a friend's apartment down in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. And a mutual friend brings this guy to the party and says, "Sam, you got to meet my friend." I'm like, okay, I have no idea why. And so I was like, "Hey," and he's like, "Hi." And I'm like, "See, he's a little bit awkward and he's got like the shaved head." And I'm like, what do you ask somebody? You don't know that. So what do you do? Right? It's always our default. What do you do? He's like, "Oh, I'm an acupuncturist." I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. I know a lot of different alternative health practitioners, healers. I don't know too many acupuncturists." But in his next breath, he was like, "But I've decided to become a Buddhist monk and I'm selling off all my worldly possessions." I'm like, whoa, like that's kind of different. I was like, "Well, did you sell your practice yet?" And he goes, "No, not yet, but I'm talking to some people." And said to him, "Well, I network a lot. I know a lot of business people. Like maybe I can help you sell your practice." And he goes, "Oh, that would be really great. It would really be good karma for you to help someone go into the monkhood." And okay, we're talking a little bit more. And then he goes, "Oh yeah, and I started this internet radio station last year." I'm like, "Wait a minute. This sounds a little familiar. Acupuncturist radio station." I'm like, "What's your name again?" And he says, "Giorgio Rapetti." And I was like, I know who you are because my friend Larry Sharp does a radio show on your network and he's told me about you, but he's never connected us. And now there he is standing in front of me in living color."
Wow.
So about a week later, we get together in his office and I'm like, "Okay, if I'm going to help you sell your business, like I need to know the good, the bad, the ugly, like go over everything." And he's telling me all about his acupuncture practice and how he studied under this Chinese grandmaster in Hong Kong and, been doing it 18 years and all this stuff. I was like, okay, like that's kind of cool, but I'm not really that interested in it because I'm not an acupuncturist. And then he gets into the radio station. I'm like, oh, like this I really got into because I have a background in public speaking and I have a degree in computer science. I have a background in technology. I did technology work for the first like 9-10 years of my career. And so that I really saw some opportunity and some potential. And I kind of jokingly said to them by the end of this 2.5 hour meeting, I'm like, geez, if I can't find someone to buy your business, I'll just buy it myself. It's such a good deal. It's like getting two businesses for the price of one. And so I go home that night and I tell my wife's a psychotherapist. She's a therapist. I tell her about the whole meeting and everything. And I have to preface this. She's Chinese. Okay. So
okay.
she has this stone cold face, doesn't say a word as I'm telling her the whole thing. And I finish and I look at her and she goes, forget helping him to sell his business. And I'm like, really? And I was kind of crestfallen because I liked the guy. I thought it was an opportunity. I helped him sell his business, make a little money. And she's like, yeah, she goes, we may not have much money left after that real estate debacle, but we may as well put what little bit we have left into a business that's actually making money. Let's just buy it ourselves. I'm like, oh, what a great idea. Let's do that. I couldn't believe I was hearing out of her mouth the same thing I had joked about him just a few hours before.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so we brought in an acupuncturist to handle his clients. I as I mentioned before, I know many practitioners, so I brought in other practitioners, created sort of a more general wellness center, and then I really focused on the radio station, and I redid the website probably at this point like 5-6 times. I've tweaked the business model, brought in different hosts and stuff. And I started doing my own show. This was 12.5 years ago. And my show now, The Conscious Consultant Hour, I get over 10,000 downloads a month on my show. Now, it took time to get there. But what I learned over time was instead of going out and looking for my tribe and trying to find my people, when I stopped doing that and I started just sharing my voice and sharing it authentically, people started to listen to me.
Yeah.
And over time, like tremendous benefits came from doing this. In 2016, I had an opportunity to get a TEDx talk. I was a featured speaker at TEDx Upper West Side. And at the time, they were asking for a speaker's reel. And I'm like, I haven't been doing much public speaking lately. I don't have a speaker's reel, but here's a bunch of interviews that I've done. And the organizer looked at the interviews and said, oh, this is really great. We'd love to have you. And I was flabbergasted. I'm like the only one I know who's like had a TEDx talk without even having a speaker's reel. And then years later, when I came out with my first book, Everyday Awakening, in 2020, it hit #1 in like 3 different categories on Amazon, and primarily because of my audience. I talked about the book. We did a launch day event, and people bought it, and they bought it multiple copies to give to their friends and family. And so it really humbled me. And I've really come to the place where finally I understand that when I stopped chasing after something, and I just allowed myself to be authentic and share my voice with the world, that then the people who really resonated with me, who appreciated me, who honored me, would come to me and support me. And so that's why I believe in this idea of doing online shows and sharing your voice so much, because I've seen the difference it's made in my life. I'm actually now a 2-time best-selling author, but it's made such a difference in my life. And I know, like, this, I'm not saying this can happen for everybody, but if you're willing to give it a shot, anybody who really wants it and sticks with it and is willing to be vulnerable and authentic with their audience, things can come from that you can't imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you completely. I think that does show up. You have to be in action around what you're doing, but so often we chase after something and we think it needs to look a certain way.
Right.
and when it shows up, it looks completely different, but it fits perfectly. And
right, exactly. It's that old adage of, like, you have to have your intention, but you hold your expectations very lightly.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes your expectations will get filled, but not in the way, not in the time, not in the way, and it may not look like what you thought it would look like, but it will come the way your heart really needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it prepares you for what you're about to go into. I think we have an idea of what we think that life will look like, but we don't have the skill or the insight or whatever's needed to keep that going from where we are unless we go through that hard thing. And
Yes.
I think there's doubt that comes with it. And I've also found that if you're really pursuing a dream, you will hit a barrier at some point that really has you question, do I just stop and go back? Or do I keep going forward, keep going forward? And what I find is if you decide to go forward, all of a sudden that thing you're talking about shows up.
But you know what's really interesting, and this is something that I didn't really understand. That's like most people don't live this way. Like most people have that goal. They have this thing like their 5-year, 10-year plan. Like they know, oh, I'm going to do this and that, and I want this and I want that. I wasn't like that. I was more the kind of guy, like I just pay attention to what's in front of me and I say yes when it resonates with me. And I've had, half a dozen different businesses and different industries. I except for real estate, I consider them all to be successful because I didn't lose money at any of them. I made money, but didn't necessarily make a lot of money. But real estate was the one that really kicked my butt. But it's kind of sometimes we just need to be present to what's right in front of us, because sometimes that opportunity like shows up, and if we're not being open, if we're not being open-minded and just being present to what this could mean for us, we can miss it very easily. I mean, it would have been very easy for me when I met this guy at the party, even though I knew who he was, to say, oh, that's really nice. Good luck, good luck selling your practice, and never had that meeting with him and never would have gotten the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I said, oh, this is life bringing me something. Here's an opportunity. Let me say yes and just see what happens. And then when my wife said yes to it too, it like that was the validation for me, because I have to admit, my wife is much more discerning than I am. She's much more critical, much more, scrutinizes things. Me, I'm like a little much more easygoing,
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I love, this man-woman dynamic, especially in a marriage. And I can imagine, because if you took her through that space of the bad real estate deal and she experienced that and the fear that comes with that, it had to be such a win when she said, let's buy it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and the real win was over the years, her supporting as we grew and developed the business and all the things that we've done over the last 12 and a half years. I mean, this is the longest I've ever stuck with any one business. Most of the time, after 3 to 5 years, I either get bored or something happens with the business and that's it.
Right. Right. Well, let me ask you, do you enjoy it now as much as you used to?
Absolutely. I mean, I learn new stuff every single week,
Yeah.
not just from me interviewing amazing people, but also all my hosts on my network. And, I have new shows coming and going all the time and always different topics and different things, but we do always, adhere to sort of our brand of uplifting, educating, and empowering our audience. But I learned something new from all the different shows on my network as well. And because it's this internet, this is technology related, you have to keep up on things. You need to know what's going on, and things are always developing, and who knows what tomorrow's going to bring. Maybe I'm going to have to, now with the metaverse and everything, maybe we'll have to do our radio shows in a metaverse studio one day. Who knows? So it's just again, being fun and open to it, and yeah, enjoying it. And I have to say, we just had our last meeting of the year this week with my staff. I have a couple of freelancers who work with me, and we always start off with our meeting with, what are you grateful for?
I love that. I love
And,
that.
and they all said to a T, like they're really grateful for working with Talk Radio NYC and working with me because of the supportive environment and our flexibility and things like that. And that to me, like, really, really feels so good inside. And that, makes me feel good that I've created an environment, not just for my hosts to thrive, but for the people who work with me to thrive as well.
Yeah. That's great. Now, I do some of the same things around our meetings. What are you grateful for? Not many people do that. What spurred you to kind of take that direction with your business and even with your meetings in a day-to-day setting?
Well, I again, my show's called The Conscious Consultant Hour. My personal brand is The Conscious Consultant. I've always been about being more aware. I've always been on a very spiritual path most of my life. Sometimes I get off of it. But there was this wonderful book I read called The Diamond Cutter by Geshe Michael Roach, who was this Buddhist Lama, Buddhist monk, who his Lama, his teacher, kind of kicked him out of the monastery and said, go apply all these Buddhist principles in the real world. And he's got a job working at a startup diamond company. And his book is all about like taking different Buddhist principles and applying them to the workplace. And so I always look for things like that. And he has some great tools, great tips, great philosophies in there. And so that was one of the things that he talked about, was like starting meetings with gratitude. And I read it and I started to, and I forgot about it. And then I was in some meeting or some seminar or something, and then somebody mentioned how they start all their business meetings with gratitude. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I read that years ago. I've got to start doing that again. And I've been doing that now for the last 3-4 years,
Yeah.
I guess. So sometimes, we know something, but then we forget it, and we
Yeah.
just need to be reminded of it.
Yeah. One of the things my partner, some of the business partners I work with, we have a 2-minute, we call it a focus session. It's really a meditation. And before we begin, we just shut the cameras, everything off, and set the timer for 2 minutes and just get centered, clear
Mm.
everything out of the head, and then come in. And we find we get so much done because we're centered, we know where we're going, and meeting doesn't have to be that long because the right things start to show up. Now,
And that's a practice in presence.
Yes,
That's a
yes.
beautiful practice to help you get present to
Mhm.
what's in the moment. And that's the thing. We're in such a distracted society that it's hard to be present. So we need some tools, some things like that
Yeah.
to help us to be present. And then, yeah, things go so much better, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Well, we were working on a program, a mentoring program, and for about 5 months, we were just hitting a wall. And we put this practice in, and I would say within the next 5 sessions we had, less than 2 weeks, we knocked it out. We'd done more in 2 weeks than we'd done 5 months, and that was neon sign. This is what we need to do. So that's how we start those meetings now. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Now, you were talking about Buddhism. Are you familiar with Michael Singer, the author?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah,
love his
I
books,
love Michael
The
Singer.
Untethered Soul and The
Yeah,
Intention Experiment. Yes.
yeah, Surrender Experiment. I love
Surrender
that. That's
Experiment.
what. Yeah, I'd read Untethered Soul, but then when I tell people all the time, if you're going to read the Surrender Experiment, get the audiobook, because I love it. It's him verbalizing it. You feel like you're sitting at dinner with him and he's going through. It's such a great practice to listen to him.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually didn't get the audiobook. I'll have to do that and listen
Oh,
to it. That must be
yeah, it's real
interesting.
good. Another audiobook I tell people all the time, it's kind of off a little, but it's Green Lights with Matthew McConaughey.
Oh,
I listened, it's one of my favorite books to listen to. I listened to it 3 times. It's like having Matthew McConaughey come over and just hang out with you and tell you about his life story, because he's the one doing it and he's so animated. You're right there with him, and he's got some
mm,
just amazing stories about insights, being present, and how the universe comes up and drops in your lap what you need in the moment.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's when you learn to have trust in life,
Yeah.
um, and just in things that are unfolding before you and being present to it. It's really the keys to just having such a fulfilled and joyful life. It's not always easy,
No.
not always, not always happy, but it's a very fulfilling life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know with you meeting all these different people, what has been an inspiring story you could share with us about someone else, or maybe a barrier you broke through because of maybe people you met on your show? Just kind of, I'd like to hear something that really just pops into your head right now about what inspired you about someone else, or what you did that maybe inspired others based on how you engaged with maybe some of the people you've met.
Wow. You know, there's so many. It's hard
I
to
know there are.
choose one. Um, so I'll talk about maybe a client I worked with in the past who, um, it really kind of goes to show for me, like inspiring and someone who's willing to show up and do the work and be open-minded. So I do business coaching and mentoring, and this gentleman came to me and he was having a tough time at work with his manager. And actually he after he had this tough time with him at work, he ended up going into business for himself, and he ended up working with him as a business owner afterwards. But the way I work with people, I always look to feel for, like, what's this underlying energetic pattern that's going on? Because oftentimes if we're having an issue in one place, it shows up in other places in life. And so he was talking about how this manager was like difficult, and he could, you never knew where you stood with him at times. He could show up and be super nice, show up at times be really harsh, and he was running, I think, a call center at the time, and so it was demoralizing for his people and stuff. And so we worked together, and I was like, well, let's just be present to that feeling that you feel when you're in this guy's presence. And he goes, okay. I was like, well, when have you felt like that before? Like when was the first time you can remember feeling like that? And he's like, oh, and it was one of those O's that you could tell, like a light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, what's that O? And he goes, my father has always had a drinking problem. And when he would come home, you never knew where he was going to be, whether he was going to be, happy drunk or mean drunk that day. And so he said, it's just like my dad. His energy is just like my dad. And I react to him just like I do my dad. And so we did some work around that. And we did some forgiveness things. There's a prayer called the Ho'oponopono, which is a Hawaiian prayer. And we worked on his relationship with his dad. Now, his dad's still alive. And it wasn't about him in like going to his dad and working on his relationship with his dad. It was working on his internal relationship with his dad.
Right.
And he really stuck with it. There were a number of practices. Now, that was the big one, but there were some other practices too. And after a couple of months, and he came to a session, so how things going with your manager and stuff? And he goes, oh, things are great. I sat down, I talked with him, I told him what was okay, what was not okay. I really, had my boundaries. He respected it, and now we're working together, and it's great. And I was just, it was so gratifying, but I was also so honored to see that he was really willing to go there. He was willing to be vulnerable. He was willing to really look at himself. And because of that, he ultimately was able to resolve his feelings on his side of the relationship, which now allowed him to show up in his workplace in a better way.
Yeah.
And so that's why like worked together really well for a couple of years. And then a couple of years later, he actually came back to me, because then he became partners with this guy, and some of the problems, kind of came up. And so then we had to take it to a deeper level. But for me, it was just so inspirational to see, like, he really stuck with it. He was really very present to it, and willing to do the work. And that to me is like my ideal kind of client to work with.
Oh, absolutely. I coach as well, and there's nothing like when people go apply, because you're there to help. You want to help, but you can't do it for them. And when they do it, that's an inspiration. It keeps you going in the work, because there are people out there that will follow that and take the coaching and go there, but because it is a risk, and they have to
Right.
trust a bit, because
Right.
many times you have to guide them there, and there's that trust that's developed within that. But
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, Sam. Well, Sam, I am so glad I had you on the show. Thanks for going and making a difference for others, and not letting that real estate deal stop you, where you went forward and did something more. Because I guarantee you, I imagine that your business has kind of exploded since COVID, just because of all
Yeah.
the different pieces, people being at home. and being able to listen more. So thanks for what you're doing in the world. And I really consider you a new friend and glad to have you in my tribe as well. Thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you so much, Greg. So appreciate it. Thank you again for having me on your show.
Everyone, thanks so much. And we'll see you next time on A Shot of Inspiration. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.